Black Swan is one of the two units that will receive a buff in version 4.0. Sadly, she isn't one of the units that are included in the free 5-star selector that we will get, but she will get a rerun. Regarding the changes in her kit, her skill has a 100% base chance to apply 20.8% defense reduction debuff to attacked enemies for 3 turns. Instead of having a 100% base chance to apply 20.8 defense reduction debuff and 1 Arcana stack on attacked enemies for 3 turns. Basically, she can't apply Arcana through her skill anymore. Her basic, it only deals damage instead of having a 65% base chance to apply 1 Arcana stack to attack the enemy and a 65% chance to apply another Arcana stack to attack enemies with DOT effects. Basically, she can no longer apply Arcana stacks from her basic. For her talent, when an enemy gets damaged from a damage over time effect, there's a 65% base chance for the same enemy to get an Arcana stack. Enemies that have Arcana will be considered to have all DOT effects and will receive Wind Shear damage over time, which has its own damage multiplier, increased by 12% per each Arcana stack on them. At the start of enemy's turn and after they receive this damage, the number of Arcana stacks on them will get halved. Max amount of Arcana stacks that can get halved at the start of the enemy's turn is 50 stacks. They can have more than 50 Arcana stacks, but excess Arcana stacks after 50 will disappear after the enemy receives the Arcana damage at the start of their turn. The Arcana damage ignores 20% of enemy's defense, and when an enemy gets damaged by it, the enemies next to them, aka adjacent enemies, will receive additional damage. Instead of having a 65% base chance for Arcana to be applied when an enemy gets damaged from a DOT effect, after enemies receive damage from Arcana at the start of their turn, Arcana stacks will reset to 1 stack. Arcana stacks can still stack up to 50 stacks, but they can't have more than 50 stacks. And when Arcana deals damage to enemies at the start of their turn, Black Swan can trigger additional effects based on the number of Arcana stacks that the enemy has. If the enemy has 7 or more Arcana stacks, Arcana's damage ignores 20% of enemy's defense. And if the enemy has 3 or more Arcana stacks, when Arcana deals damage, it will deal damage to adjacent enemies, and it will have a 65% base chance to apply Arcana on them. Basically, it still increases the amount of Arcana stacks that enemies get. If the team includes the team members who apply DOT effects, it still applies the DOT effects on enemies with Arcana and makes them take damage that scales with the amount of Arcana stacks on them at the start of their turn. Enemies will have more Arcana stacks after the turn ends, since their amount gets halved instead of resetting to 1 stack. Enemies can have more than 50 Arcana stacks on them instead of 50 being the max limit. However, stacks more than 50 will get deleted, not halved, after enemies' turns end. Damage from Arcana ignores 20% of all enemies' defense, instead of ignoring 20 defense of enemies with only 7 or more Arcana stacks. And when Arcana deals damage to any enemy, the adjacent enemies will also receive damage, instead of only the enemies that have 3 or more Arcana stacks. And Black Swan won't be able to apply Arcana stacks from her talent anymore. Her ultimate applies Epiphany for 2 turns on all enemies, which gives the enemies an unconditional 25% damage taken increased debuff. When an Arcana stack gets applied on an enemy, there's a 50% base chance that the same stack will get increased by 1. It is not that an additional stack will get inflicted, it is only the amount of Arcana stacks that will be in a single Arcana application that will have a chance of increasing, not the amount of Arcana applications. And the amount of Arcana stacks won't be halved at the start of enemy's turn, instead of Epiphany giving enemies a conditional 25% damage taken increase during their own turn debuff, which, as it says, it only applies to the damage that the enemies receive during their own turn, which basically like DOT effects, shock, bleed, etc. When enemies get Arcana applied to them, they also get affected with every DOT effect: burn, bleed, shock, and wound shear. Arcana stacks won't reset after they deal damage to enemies at the start of their turn, and this can only happen once per Epiphany. aka once per ultimate. Basically, the 25% damage taken increase debuff is effective at all times, not just during enemy's turn. The amount of Arcana stacks that get applied to enemies increases instead of making Arcana affect enemies with DOT effects, and makes Arcana stacks last longer as long as enemies have Epiphany, instead of making Arcana stacks last longer only one time per ultimate. Arthresis. When Black Swan attacks an enemy, there's a 65% chance to apply 5 Arcana stacks on it, instead of having a 65% base chance to apply 1 Arcana stack on an enemy for each DOT effect. So if an enemy has all DOT effects, which is 4, the 65% chance will happen 4 times, and that enemy can get from 0 to 4 Arcana stacks, but only when Black Swan attacks it with her skill. So basically it gives more Arcana stacks, and they can get applied from using any attack instead of only with her skill. Each enemy that enters the battle will have a 65% base chance to get an Arcana stack. When enemies enter combat or Black Swan attacks them with her ultimate and basic attack, they will have a 100% base chance to get applied with 20.8 defense reduction debuff for 3 turns. Instead of every time an enemy gets a DOT effect triggered during a teammate's attack, there's a 65% chance that that enemy will get an Arcana stack. So if multiple DOT effects trigger, like shock, bleed, multiple Arcana stacks might be applied, and the max amount of Arcana stacks that can get applied during a single attack is 3 stacks. So basically, she's able to reduce the enemy's defense more often instead of being able to apply more stacks via teammates' attacks if they trigger DOT effects, which is basically what Kafka does. Gives up to 72% damage increase buff that equals 60% of Black Swan's effect hit rate to all allies, which means she needs to have 120 effect hit rate to get the max amount of buff, instead of giving up to 72% damage increase buff to only herself. So basically, she buffs the whole team instead of just herself. Her Eidolon too, when an enemy enters the battle, they have a 100% base chance of getting 30 Arcana stacks. Instead of when an enemy with Arcana dies, the adjacent enemies will have a 100% base chance of getting 6 Arcana stacks. So basically, Black Swan gives more Arcana stacks, which is 30 stacks when enemies enter the battle, instead of 6 stacks when they die. When enemies have Epiphany from Black Swan's ultimate, they get a 20% damage taken increase debuff, and when they get a turn or die, Black Swan restores its energy. Instead of enemies that have Epiphany get a 10% effect resistance reduction debuff, and when they get a turn or die, she still gets 8 energy, but she can only restore 8 energy once per Epiphany, aka once per ultimate. So basically it makes enemies take more damage instead of make it easier to apply DOT effects on them, and it makes her get more energy since there is no limit on the energy restoration anymore. Our Eidolon 6, the max amount of Arcana stacks that get halved and not completely deleted at the start of enemy's turn increase from 50 to 80. When enemies get attacked by Black Swan's teammates, she has a 65% base chance to apply an Arcana stack on them. For each 1 Arcana stack that Black Swan applies to an enemy, increase the number of applied Arcana stacks by 1 stack. So if she applied 30 Arcana stacks from her Eidolon 4 to enemies that enter the battle, the 30 Arcana stacks will become 60 stacks. So since every 1 stack become 2 stacks, instead of when enemies get attacked by Black Swan's teammates, she has a 65% base chance to apply an Arcana stack on them. And when Black Swan inflicts Arcana on an enemy, there is a 50% fixed chance to increase the number of the applied Arcana stack by 1. Basically, it became easier for enemies to hold more than 50 Arcana stacks. It still makes Black Swan able to apply more Arcana stacks when teammates attack, and it doubles the amount of Arcana stacks that Black Swan applies on enemies, instead of having a chance to increase the Arcana stacks applied by 1 stack when she applies any amount of Arcana stacks. I have to say she got a lot of changes, definitely more than Sparkle. and definitely more text than her. I can see why she wasn't included in the free selector. If you are using DOT units like Kafka or Hycelins, then obviously you should pull for her. If you want to try her out, but you are reluctant on pulling her because you don't have the rest of the DOT team, then don't worry, because one of the nice things about version 4.0 is that you can get most of the premium DOT units in it, since Hycelins and Black Swan will have a rerun, and Kafka is one of the units that you can choose from the free selector that everyone will get in version 4.0. So all that remains to have the complete premium DOT team is Hua, since I heard she is the best sustainer for damage over time teams. Congrats to DOT mains for having this win and opportunity in front of them, because you can also pull full Eidolons if you main DOT team. And that's everything so far. Tell me what you think about Black Swan, and if you enjoyed the video or it helped you, please remember to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.